Now, viewers, we have been joined by Ayub Sumbal, geopolitical analyst. Welcome to Pakistan TV, Mr. Ayub.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Ayub, we see that earlier U.S. Senate has taken a very strong, very firm step, which is symbolic, but it shows the political instability right now in the U.S. Senate. So after that, we see U.S. President Donald Trump's comments coming forward, in which he again reiterates that Iran can never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. How do you interpret the situation, and how important negotiations can be right now for Iran and for U.S. as well, keeping the Senate resolution in view?
I think this statement that comes to Donald Trump that Iran will not be allowed to have the nuclear weapon. This statement comes after the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. I think he said that Iran have the right to have the nuclear weapon. So Donald Trump's statement is once again this powerful rhetoric that he will not allow Iran to have the nuclear weapons. And simultaneously, he is threatening Iran while he praise and applaud his military power. He said that that Iran will not have the right. So it's mean that the U.S. Is clear on this stance that Iran will not. And this is also very clear that Iranians are also not taking this as serious, and they would definitely will not let down this nuclear enrichment because the proposal that Donald Trump is trying to implement is the 20-year pause on the uranium enrichment that Iranians will not going to be accept. So regarding the U.S. Senate, I think that is pretty much divided, and it's coming every day. There is a more division in the United States on Iran. There is a more pressure that is coming on the Donald Trump, though he can surpass these Congress resolutions. Still, he have the right, but I think that the one statement that he mentioned that the war will be quickly ended. So it's mean that he is giving some hint that might be he will go for any military strike, that he would like to end it very quickly. But I don't think so, because previously when the US invaded Iran, that was also quite wrong calculation and intelligence reports that the war will end in 24 or 48 hours. But it took the world to a very horrible economic recession. So I think that again, Donald Trump, if he miscalculate and try to engage Iran in any other war front, that could be disaster for the United States. We also mention here that even the GCC countries try to get the confidence of Donald Trump, and they said the Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, they categorically talk with the Donald Trump, and they said that ultimately the price of the war would be paid by the GCC countries. So he should refrain and he should be restrained to engage Iran on any other front.
Absolutely. Mr. Sumbal, we see that the oil prices, therefore, they have fell once again after U.S. President Donald Trump's remarks. That also varies days after days. So the situation right now for the Middle East and specifically for countries like Pakistan, for Iran itself, this escalation or this stalled negotiations between Iran and U.S. is a very quite dangerous situation for the whole region itself. So what geopolitical implications are we discussing right now when it comes to Iran and US? Because we don't see any negotiations happening at the first place, and if they do not come to any positive resolution or conclusion.
Of course, it has a very serious geopolitical implications, because you know that if you see the timeline of Donald Trump's statements, so he gave statements one day, different statement. The next couple of hours, his statement changed, and then after 40 hours, it's become totally a new situation. So his statements actually will have a very strong impact on the global economy, especially the oil prices. So when he gave the statement, there is a very clear price fluctuation. So sometimes the barrel goes $100 down, sometimes it goes $100 up. So this fluctuation has a very serious implications on the economic front. So a lot of countries are facing right now this challenge. So these economic implications is directly linked to the geopolitical implications. So that's why I think that overall, when this atmosphere is unfolding, so there is a very drastic economic impact on the global economies, because the prices are fluctuating, so things are fluctuating, and it has a very adverse action on the, especially the economies, not only developing but even developed countries. So I think that the statement that comes from the Donald Trump is achieve this this rhetoric that have a very strong implications of the geopolitics and to create the mess in the countries that could damage the economy. So I think that his statements can also have a very strong impact.
Absolutely. Mr. Sumbal, also a very important meeting is right now taking place between President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin. Both were leaders, of course, very reputable ones. So this meeting is happening after quite a short time when President Donald Trump was there in Beijing some days ago, and he met President Xi Jinping, and then there were talks related to Iran and a US conflict and other talks as well regarding trade and economy. Now, after a very short period of time, President Vladimir Putin is seen meeting President Xi Jinping. How do you interpret this meeting? What can be possible outcomes they're going to discuss? And what can be the effects and impacts of these meetings in a short span of time, which is happening has happened and which are happening right now?
Yeah, so that is very important meeting, and I think after Donald Trump visitor, that might be a coincidence, because that is something like this, that this is 25th anniversary of the treaty of the friendly neighbors treaty that is that Russia make with to the neighboring countries. So that is going to be the 25th anniversary of this. So I think that that this is actually to pledge and to have the more cooperation between China and Russia. So Vladimir Putin visit actually highlight that especially the international breach, the international law breach is going on. There is an erosion of the international law. So President Putin mentioned that the Russia and China would like to save this international law. So his purpose of the visit is actually to engage China, Russia, and the other countries into the multilateral cooperation. Because at one side, when we saw that the US is quitting and leaving the multilateral and the international bodies, and at the same time we saw that the China and Russia is backing these multilateral organizations like the SCO, we saw the BRICS, we saw the Global South, and all these countries. So I think that Putin make it very clear that there is not any alignment to any country, that it is not going to be any sort of the block against the United States. So this is a formal meeting that is taking place on the 25th anniversary of the treaty of the signing of the Friendly Countries Cooperation.
Absolutely. Mr. Sumbal, can we say that China, can we just interpret this, that China is playing any role when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, and on the other side when it comes to US and Iran? What role actually China is playing by holding these important meetings and on a very larger scale?
Of course, China has a big role, and China is one of the major stakeholder in all these things, because China has this power orientation and an epicenter of the power, especially when it comes to the global multipolar rise. So China have a stance, and that is of course stand with the boundaries and the sovereignty of the countries, because China support that the sovereignty and the integrity of the countries should be protected. Even President Putin also mentioned this thing, that the progress, peace, and the prosperity of the countries must be respected. So I think that has China plays a major role. Beijing has a very clear stance on Iran and even on the Ukraine, and they are the supporter of the peace and to end the war. And they have been playing a very integral role in this whole process.
Thank you very much for joining Pakistan TV.